This story is so haunting it makes you hold your breath, unfolding beneath a burning desert sky and the smell of dust and smoke. It's a place where two broken lives collide, and fate refuses to stay silent. It all began with a single wounded stranger at a lonely station. Something small, yet powerful enough to ignite a war over land, water, and loyalty at Ashen Vows. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The desert lay quiet beneath a hard blue sky, its red dust stretching endless toward the horizon near Apache Pass. Silence pressed down like weight on the chest, broken only by the wind scraping across weathered wood. At the edge of that vast emptiness stood the Montrose Way station, more ruin than refuge, owned by Clara Whitmore. At 24, Clara carried lines of worry no one her age should know. She was no heiress, only an orphan who had crossed 2,000 miles from the east, trading silk and polish for calico and grit. Everything she had left in the world was tied to this place, the last thing her father, Samuel Whitmore, had given her. She had been raised in cities, her hands unused to plows or reins, yet there was a stubborn heat in her that the desert had failed to burn out. Still, sand and solitude were not her greatest threats. That honor belonged to Wade Kessler. Wade was 32, sharp-featured and clean in a way that felt dangerous. His smile never reached his eyes. He was no suitor. He was a hunter. The mortgage on the station sat in his pocket, and he circled Clara with patient intent, like a wolf waiting for weakness. He had stood on her porch that afternoon, dust curling around his polished boots. "Be reasonable, Clara," he'd said, voice slick and calm. "Sell the land to me for pennies and go back east, or stay here, starve, and let the desert finish the job." He didn't know then that the desert was already preparing something far worse than hunger. That night, the storm came fast and brutal. Thunder rattled the floorboards while Clara sat alone in the dark, a rifle laid across her knees, listening to the wind howl like something alive. Then she heard it, not the wind, but a heavy, wet thud against the barn door. Her pulse jumped. She swung the door open, expecting a stray animal. Lightning split the sky, and the truth stole her breath. A man lay face down in the mud, long black hair plastered to his back, rain washing over blood-soaked wounds. He was Apache, and he was dying on her doorstep. In that instant, Clara faced a choice that would alter everything. She could shut the door, or she could pull him inside. Rain slammed the earth, turning cracked ground into slick mud. Wind screamed through broken boards, a sound lonely enough to chill the strongest spine. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, lantern shaking in her grip, shadows leaping across the soaked figure at her feet. She knew the law. Every paper and every saloon from Tucson to Tombstone made it clear, sheltering an Apache, especially a warrior, was treason. Prison if she was lucky. Worse if she wasn't. The safe choice was simple. Bolt the door, wait for morning, fetch the sheriff. Or, if she were the ruthless woman Wade Kessler believed her to be, she could raise the rifle and end the danger right there in the mud. But Clara Whitmore was not ruthless. She was stubborn. She was desperate. And as she lowered the lantern, light caught the man's face. He wasn't the monster dime novels promised. He was young, barely older than she was, his sharp features twisted with pain. This is the moment everything changed. His face, hard cut and striking, was twisted with pain. Black hair clung to his neck, slick with rain. Beneath the shredded buckskin of his shirt, blood spread fast, dark and frightening, soaking into the mud. Blended with the rain, he didn't look like a savage. He looked like a man at the very edge of his last breath. A sound left his lips so faint, Clara thought it was only the wind passing through the boards. Then his eyes cracked open. Just a sliver, dark, fever-bright, filled with a desperate plea that cut straight through her fear. The decision came to her without thought. "I can't leave you here," she whispered, mostly to herself. She set the lantern on a dry bale of hay and slid her hands beneath his shoulders. He was heavy, solid muscle turned dead weight. Clara Whitmore clenched her jaw, boots digging into the straw-covered floor as she pulled, breath tearing from her lungs in short, sharp gasps. Inch by agonizing inch, she dragged him out of the storm and into the barn. But the barn wasn't safe. Wade Kessler came here. Travelers passed through. If anyone saw him, they'd hang him first and ask questions later, and they'd pull her down with him. Her eyes went to the back of the tack room, where a thick rug concealed the mouth of the old root cellar. It was dark. It was damp. But it was the one place the world never bothered to look. It took every scrap of strength she had to haul him down the narrow wooden steps. He groaned once, a low, guttural sound that made her flinch. But he never woke. When she finally laid him on a pallet of old blankets amid the smell of dry earth and potatoes, Clara collapsed beside him. Her chest heaved. Her hands shook uncontrollably. In 10 minutes flat, the city-bred girl had become an outlaw. There was no time for regret. Blood was still pouring. She ran back to the kitchen. Boiling water, tearing strips from a clean cotton petticoat. Fine white cloth brought from the east. Never meant for a life like this. She grabbed a bottle of whiskey and her sewing kit, heart pounding a wild rhythm that refused to slow. Back in the cellar, silence pressed in. The storm outside had faded to a distant rumble, sealing the small underground room off from the rest of the world. She knelt beside him, slicing away the soaked buckskin. The wound was ugly, a bullet hole just below the shoulder blade, shot from behind. A coward's shot. "This is going to hurt," she murmured, knowing he couldn't hear. She poured the whiskey over the wound. His body jerked violently. Breath hissed through clenched teeth as his eyes flew open. Clara recoiled, half expecting him to lash out. But he couldn't. He was too weak. Instead, his hands shot forward and closed around her wrist. His grip was fierce despite the tremor in it, his skin burning hot with fever. Fever burned through him. For a brief moment, his grip was shockingly strong. Neither of them moved. The lantern flame wavered, throwing long, restless shadows across the dirt walls. "Easy," Clara Whitmore said, her voice shaking but gentle. She didn't pull her hand away. "You're safe. I'm helping you." He watched her closely. His eyes were obsidian dark, steady, unreadable. Fear lived there, yes, but beneath it lay something sharper, something calculating. He studied her the way a man on the edge of death weighs truth from danger. The needle in her hand, the strip of white cloth, the worry written plainly across her face. Slowly, the tension drained from his arm. His fingers loosened around her wrist, lingering a heartbeat longer against her skin before falling back to the blanket. That was permission. For the next hour, the cellar filled only with the hiss of the lantern and the soft rip of torn fabric. Clara worked with a focus she hadn't known she possessed. She stitched the wound, hands steady despite the fear fluttering low in her belly. She cooled his brow with damp cloths, brushing wet hair back from his face. The closeness made her cheeks warm. She was tending a man she didn't know, one her world had taught her to fear, with a tenderness that felt both dangerous and natural. She traced the quiet map of his scars, pale lines along his arms that spoke of past fights and narrow escapes. Heat rolled from his skin into the damp air. Once, he murmured in his own tongue, a low, melodic line that sounded like a prayer or a curse. "Rest now," she whispered, laying a cool cloth across his brow. "Rest." He kept his eyes on her until they finally slipped shut. Even in sleep, his hand stayed curled near hers, as if holding fast to the only kindness he'd found in the storm. Morning arrived under a false calm. The sky had been scrubbed clean, blazing a hard, blinding blue. Out in the yard, the mud was already crusting over in the rising heat. Clara stood in the kitchen, eyes gritty from a sleepless night. She had spent the hours before dawn in a chair beside the trap door, rifle laid across her knees. Every creak of the house had sounded like approaching boots. She was pouring herself a cup of black coffee when she heard it. Hoofbeats, not the slow, tired plod of a traveler, but the heavy, arrogant rhythm of a powerful stallion. Clara froze. She knew that sound. She barely had time to smooth her hair and pinch color into her pale cheeks before a hard knock rattled the front door. When she opened it, Wade Kessler stood there, framed by the bright morning sun. He looked untouched by the storm. His suit carried a light dusting but remained crisp, deliberate. The silver-studded saddle on the horse behind him caught the morning sun and flashed. "Good morning, Clara Whitmore," he said, lifting his hat. His smile was bright, practiced, but his eyes were already sweeping the room over her shoulder. "Rough night," Wade Kessler went on smoothly. "I was half afraid the storm might have blown you clean away." "The house is still standing, Mr. Kessler," Clara replied. Her voice came out tighter than she meant it to. "My father built it to last. Please," he said lightly, stepping past her without waiting. The spurs on his boots chimed soft and deliberate. "Call me Wade. We're practically family, considering how much of this place I already own on paper." He crossed the room and stopped squarely on the braided rug that concealed the trap door. Clara's heart slammed so hard it stole her breath. The blood drained from her face. If Chayton so much as groaned, if he coughed, shifted, breathed too loudly, it would be over. "Coffee?" she blurted, moving fast. "I just put a fresh pot on." "That would be lovely," Wade said. He stayed where he was, rocking back on his heels, the heavy floorboards creaking beneath his weight. Clara turned to the stove, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the pot with a towel to steady herself. The silence pressed in. She could hear the slow ticking of the grandfather clock. Flies droned against the window. And beneath it all, inside her own head, she imagined the quiet breathing of the man hidden under Wade's boots. She handed him the cup. He took it. His fingers brushed hers. Cool, dry, and terrifying. "You seem on edge, my dear," he observed, blowing on the steam. "Did the storm frighten you?" "I didn't sleep much," Clara lied. "The wind." Wade took a slow sip, his gaze wandering the kitchen. "You know, it's not safe for a woman to be alone out here. Especially now?" Clara asked, leaning back against the counter to keep her legs from buckling. His expression hardened. The charm drained away, replaced by something cold and sharp. "There was trouble yesterday," he said. "An Apache named Chayton hit one of my supply wagons near the pass." Clara's fingers tightened on the counter's edge. "A raid?" "Worse," Wade said, his voice dropping. "He didn't take food or horses. He took documents, private papers." His eyes locked on hers. "He's a spy, Clara. A dangerous, violent savage." He stepped closer, his voice tightening. "I tracked him halfway across the valley before the rain wiped the trail clean. I put a bullet in him." A pause. Cold satisfaction. "Right in the back. He's wounded. Desperate." His eyes narrowed. "And he's a monster." The room tilted for Clara Whitmore. A monster. Her mind betrayed her, dragging up the image of the young man hidden below. The way Chayton had clutched her wrist, not to strike, but to hold on. The fever-bright eyes filled with fear, not cruelty. "If he's wounded," Clara said carefully, forcing her voice to stay level, "then maybe he's crawled off to die." Wade Kessler laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Let's hope so, because if I find him, I won't just kill him. I'll make an example of him." His smile thinned. No one steals from Wade Kessler. He drained his coffee and set the cup down with a hard clink. "I'm heading to the creek bed south of here." He adjusted his hat. "If you see anything at all, fire 3 shots into the air. My men are close." At the door, he paused and looked back at her one last time. "Don't be foolish, Clara. This land eats the weak." A beat. "Don't let it eat you too." When the door shut and the sound of his horse faded, Clara didn't move. She couldn't. Her eyes dropped to the braided rug. Wade hadn't been hunting a thief. He was hunting a witness. The man hidden below hadn't stolen supplies. He'd taken papers. Evidence. Clara understood then. She hadn't just saved a wounded traveler. She had stepped straight into the path of a war she didn't yet understand. She lunged for the rug, flung it aside, yanked open the trap door, and hurried down the steps. Chayton was awake. He was propped on one elbow, face pale, sweat shining on his skin. A knife. Where had he found a knife? Shook in his hand as he stared at the ceiling, at the exact place where Wade had been standing. He looked at Clara. The blade lowered. Just an inch. "He's gone," Clara whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. "He's gone." Chayton studied her, and for the first time, the hardness in his eyes fractured. He had heard everything. He knew she could have turned him in. With one word, she could have ended her danger and bought her safety. But she hadn't. "Why?" he rasped, voice rough as gravel. "Why you not tell?" Clara glanced at the bandage on his shoulder, then met his gaze again. The fear still pounded in her chest. But something else was rising to meet it. But something else rose to meet it. Defiance. A spark of the fire her father, Samuel Whitmore, had always told her lived inside her. She spoke quietly. "I don't think you're the monster in this story." Days stretched into weeks. The desert summer claimed the land. Spring storms vanished, replaced by a heat so brutal it seemed to bleach the color from the sky itself. Deep beneath the station, the man Clara Whitmore knew as Chayton began to heal. His recovery was a quiet miracle, born of whiskey, clean water, and a toughness forged long before maps and fences ever scarred the land. Then, one morning, when Clara lifted the heavy braided rug to bring him fresh water, the pallet lay empty. Her heart slammed against her ribs, hollow and panicked. Had he gone? Slipped away in the night to die alone? Or returned to his people? Worse still, had Wade Kessler found him? She searched the barn, hands shaking. Nothing. Only dust drifting through shafts of sunlight. But as the days passed, Clara realized something unsettling. She wasn't alone. It began with small things, details she tried to explain away. One morning she woke to a silence that felt wrong. It took her a moment to understand what was missing. The constant drip, drip, drip from the kitchen roof that had plagued her since arriving. She stepped outside and looked up. Fresh shingles. Rough cut, but fitted with skill, sealing the rot. 2 days later, she walked toward the woodpile, dreading the axe work that blistered her city-softened hands, only to find the logs already split and stacked with precise, almost deliberate order. Then there was the food. A pair of rabbits, skinned and cleaned, hanging by the back door, a basket of piñon nuts, bundles of fresh herbs she couldn't name, sharp with the scent of lemon and earth. The truth settled over her like a warm blanket. He hadn't left. He'd simply moved from the cellar into the shadows. He wasn't a servant. He wasn't a prisoner. He had become something else entirely. A ghost. A silent, unseen presence circling the edges of her life. Watching. Repairing. Guarding. The fear born on that first storm-soaked night began to fade, replaced by a slow, steady pull of curiosity. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the hills in bruised purple and burning orange, Clara Whitmore decided she was done living with ghosts. She walked past the corral, beyond the broken fence line, and up toward a rise crowned with ancient juniper trees that overlooked the station. At first, she didn't see him. He was so still, he seemed carved into the land itself, a figure shaped from desert stone. But as she climbed higher, he turned. He was no longer the shattered, bleeding man she had dragged through the mud. He stood straight now, tall and solid, his chest broad and marked with scars. His black hair was pulled back, and the silence of the desert hung on him like a mantle. Clara Whitmore stopped a few steps away. Her breath caught, not from the climb, but from the weight of his presence. "You're hard to find," she said, her voice sounding small in the wide, open air. Chayton studied her. His eyes were dark, sharp with intelligence, guarded. He didn't smile, but he didn't retreat either. "You needed wood," he said. His voice was deep, rough, English grinding out slowly, like stone striking flint. "Roof was bad." "I could have fixed the roof," Clara replied, though she knew it wasn't true. "You should be resting. You should be gone. Wade Kessler is still out there. If he finds me, he follows tracks," Chayton said simply. "I leave no track." She stepped closer, bolder now in the fading light. "Why?" she asked. "Why stay? You could be miles away by now. You could be free." Chayton looked out across the valley, watching shadows stretch over the scrubland. He seemed to weigh his words, or perhaps her. At last, he turned back to her, his gaze intense enough to prickle her skin. "You gave life," he said. The words were plain, broken, but they carried the weight of a sacred vow. "I return debt, life for life." It wasn't affection. It wasn't obedience. It was honor. In his world, saving a life demanded balance be restored. Yet as Clara watched the way he subtly placed himself between her and the wind, she wondered if it was truly only debt. "I didn't do it for a debt," she whispered. "I know," Chayton answered. "That is why I stay." The true turning point, however, didn't come with a look or a word. It came 3 nights later. The heat finally broke, leaving the air cool and sweet. Chayton appeared at the back porch where Clara sat mending a harness by lantern light. He said nothing. He simply set a worn, water-stained leather satchel on the table between them. Clara knew it instantly. It was the stolen property Wade Kessler had been raging about. The reason he had been hunting Chayton like an animal now lay between them. "This is what you took," Clara Whitmore said, her hands hovering over the pouch. "Not steal," Chayton replied, his jaw tightening. "Taken back. It belonged to man and wagon." Clara went still. "Before Wade Kessler killed him?" Chayton nodded once. Grim. Final. "Look," Clara said. She opened the satchel. She expected money, or maybe a crude map to hidden gold, the usual fevered fantasies that drove men mad in the West. Instead, she drew out a thick stack of papers, creased and water-stained, covered in precise handwriting and geological sketches. At the top of each page was an official seal. U.S. Geological Survey. She lifted them closer to the lantern, squinting at the markings. There was her land, the Montrose station, outlined in red ink. But it wasn't the surface that had been emphasized. It was what lay beneath. Aquifer, she read aloud, the word awkward on her tongue. Subterranean reservoir. Estimated capacity. Limitless. She looked up at Chayton, confusion tightening her brow. Water. He wants the station for water, Chayton said quietly. Water is life. In the desert, he went on, water is power, more than gold. Gold runs out, water makes kings. He stepped closer, tracing a line across the map with his finger. Kessler knows. He brings men. Machines, they drill. They take everything. Dry the creek. Dry the wells of my people. Dry all. Your father. The mention hit Clara like a blow. The paper slipped from her fingers. My father died of consumption, she said, her voice thin. The doctor said his lungs failed. Chayton shook his head slowly. His eyes held deep sorrow, but also an unmovable certainty. I saw, he said softly, from the ridge. Kessler came, gave drink. A pause. Your father slept, did not wake. The world tilted. Night rushed in around her, silence roaring in her ears. Suddenly everything aligned. The sudden collapse of Samuel Whitmore's health. The way Wade Kessler had appeared almost immediately after the funeral, offering to buy the worthless dry land. The way he had looked at the station not with contempt, but hunger. He hadn't just bullied her father. He had murdered him. And now he meant to steal the very lifeblood of the territory, turning the Montrose station into the heart of his private empire. A scream rose in Clara's chest, hot, sharp, unstoppable. But before it could break free, a hand settled on her shoulder, heavy, warm, steady, grounding. Breathe, Chayton said. Clara Whitmore looked up at him, rage blurring her vision. He killed him. For water, Chayton corrected quietly. He kills for power. He held her gaze. We are the same. You and I. He took my land. He took your blood. We are left behind. Clara covered his hand with hers, gripping tight. The barrier between them, the wall of culture, of race, of fear, collapsed into dust. They were no longer just a woman and a warrior. They were two orphans standing in the wreckage carved by the same monster. I won't let him have it, Clara vowed, her voice shaking with a new, dangerous resolve. I'll burn this station to the ground before I let Wade Kessler take it. Chayton studied her. For the first time, a faint ghost of a smile touched his lips. Terrifying and beautiful all at once. No burn, he said. We fight. That night, sleep refused to come. The truth crackled in the air, charged and restless. Clara stepped onto the front porch, shawl pulled tight against the desert chill, and found Chayton sitting on the steps, carving ironwood. He didn't stop when she sat beside him. The space between them was small, scandalously small by town standards. Out here, beneath a sky thick with stars, the rules felt small too. They sat in silence, listening to coyotes yip and howl in the distance. The land is loud tonight, Clara murmured. Chayton paused his knife and tilted his head. You hear? I hear coyotes, she said. The wind in the sage. No, he answered softly. Listen deeper. Under the wind. Clara closed her eyes. She pushed past the obvious sounds, tuned herself to the rhythm of the night. Slowly, it came. The scuttle of a beetle through dry grass, the settling creak of the house beams, the faint, almost imperceptible tremor of the earth itself. The land speaks, Chayton said, his voice a low rumble. It tells where water hides, where danger walks. White men do not listen. They only shout. They want to own. You can't own the wind, Clara said. "You can't own water. Wade Kessler thinks he can." "He thinks," Chayton agreed, "but the land knows better." He turned to look at her. The lantern light traced the sharp lines of his face. He lifted his hand, hesitated for a breath, then gently brushed a loose strand of hair back behind her ear. "You have fire, Clara Whitmore," he said. It was the first time he had spoken her name. On his tongue it sounded different, heavy, almost sacred. "Wade Kessler sees only a girl," Chayton went on. "He does not see the fire. That is his mistake." Clara held his gaze, truly looked at him. She saw the pain etched around his eyes, the strength set in his jaw, and the loneliness that mirrored her own. "I've been alone for a long time," she admitted, the words slipping free before she could stop them. "Even before my father died. I never fit in back east, and here, I thought the land would swallow me whole." "You are not alone," Chayton said. He didn't step back. "Two stones can build a wall," he continued. "Two fires can hold back the dark." In that moment, beneath the vast and unfamiliar sky of the Arizona Territory, something shifted beyond repair. This was no longer just a bargain for survival. It was recognition. Two souls seeing one another clearly. They were outcasts, cast aside by a world that wanted to tame them, own them, or erase them. But here, in the quiet dark, they had found something stronger than any army. They had found each other. "Teach me," Clara said, her voice steady. "Teach me to listen. Teach me to fight. If we're going to stop him, I need to know what you know." Chayton nodded. He slid his knife back into its sheath and looked toward the horizon, where darkness hid 1,000 threats. For the first time in years, he didn't look like a man bracing for death. He looked like a man choosing life. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin." Above them the stars turned slowly, silent witnesses to the pact made on the porch of a crumbling station. A vow of vengeance, of survival, and of a love just beginning to root itself in the dry, unforgiving earth. Waiting is always the hardest part of any war. For 3 days after the truth of the aquifer came to light, a heavy, suffocating silence settled over the Montrose station. The heat returned, shimmering off the hardpan clay, bending the air until the horizon looked submerged. Inside the house, the air stayed cold with tension. Clara Whitmore moved through the rooms of her father's home, but she no longer walked like the city girl who had arrived months before. Once frightened by spiders and silence, Clara Whitmore now moved with purpose. She boarded up the windows, leaving only narrow slits for sight lines. She filled every barrel she owned with water. She stripped down her father's Winchester and cleaned it until the metal shone dark and slick like oil. She was no longer protecting a building. She was protecting a legacy. She was protecting the truth. From the shadows, Chayton watched. He no longer hid in the cellar. He moved openly now, though for him, openly still meant more felt than seen. For hours he worked clay and charcoal across his skin, painting the war marks of his people. Not for ceremony, not for tradition, for fear. He knew the men Wade Kessler hired. Superstitious men. Cowards who fought for coin, not conviction. He intended to become their nightmare. The attack did not come at high noon, like the legends men bragged about in saloons. It came in the dead center of night, when the moon hid behind a wall of clouds. It began with the smell. Something smashed against the front porch. Whoosh, like a giant drawing breath. In seconds, the dry boards, seasoned by years of desert sun, caught fire. Orange light burst into the darkness, turning night into a flickering, terrifying day. "Fire!" a man shouted from the black. "Burn them out like rats!" Clara didn't scream. She didn't freeze. An icy calm settled over her. She seized the rifle and kicked open the back door, moving not away from danger but toward it, sliding into position behind the water trough. Bullets tore through the air, angry hornets chewing splinters from the wood. Above the roar of flames, Wade Kessler's voice thundered, cold and certain. "Sign the deed. The water stops. Stay, and you burn." Clara lined the rifle through the narrow fence slats. Her hands were steady. She fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. Bruising, solid, familiar. A man near the corral screamed and dropped his torch. "I'm not leaving!" Clara shouted back, her voice raw with smoke and fury. "This is my land!" Kessler barked an order. 4 riders burst from the tree line, galloping hard toward the burning house with torches raised. They meant to circle her, to choke her in heat and smoke. But they had forgotten the desert. And they had forgotten what lived in it. From the roof of the barn, a place no man should have been able to reach, a shape launched itself into the fire-lit air. It was Chayton. He didn't land like a man. He landed like a mountain lion. He came down hard onto the back of the lead rider's horse. The hired gun screamed, not just in pain, but in raw animal terror. Chayton's face was smeared in black and white clay, a living mask. His eyes burned with a ferocity that turned blood to ice. He moved faster than reason allowed. He ripped the rider free, slammed him into the dirt, and spun in the same motion. His knife flashed in the firelight. He didn't kill, he crippled, a clean slice through a saddle girth, a brutal strike to a wrist. Precision, control, violence measured and deliberate. He was a storm given shape. The horses panicked. They smelled smoke. They smelled blood. And in their midst stood this painted demon. The line shattered. Men who had been shouting curses moments earlier now hauled on reins, desperate to flee the reach of the Apache ghost. "Hold your ground!" Wade Kessler roared, driving his massive stallion straight into the chaos. "He's just one man! Shoot him!" But they couldn't. He was everywhere and nowhere, slipping between frantic horses, vanishing into smoke, using confusion as armor. From behind the trough, Clara Whitmore watched, her heart pounding wild and fast. She fired again, forcing back a man who tried to swing wide on Chayton. They were moving as one body now, her eyes, his hands, her distance, his closeness. Then she saw it. Through the smoke, the fire caught a flash of silver. The silver-studded saddle. Wade Kessler was charging, not at Chayton. At her. He'd seen the muzzle flash. He spurred his horse hard, his face twisted into naked, hateful greed. He lifted his heavy revolver, leveling it straight at Clara's chest. "No!" Chayton's shout ripped through the night. He broke cover, sprinting across the open yard, straight into gunfire. Kessler fired. Clara screamed, but Chayton didn't fall. He leapt. He caught the stallion's bridle mid-charge, using its own momentum to wrench the massive head down. The horse reared, screaming, hooves slashing the air. Wade Kessler, the man who believed he owned the land, was thrown from his silver throne. He hit the dirt hard, the breath blasted from his lungs. Still, he was quick. He scrambled to his knees, gun already coming up. Chayton rose opposite him, blood streaking down from a shallow cut at his temple. "Enough," Kessler snarled, finger tightening on the trigger. Chayton didn't flinch. He stood straight, chest rising hard, placing himself squarely between the gun and Clara Whitmore. His arms spread wide, flesh and bone offered as a shield. He was ready to take the bullet, ready to die, not for a debt, for her. "Move, savage!" Wade Kessler screamed, his hand shaking. "I'll kill you both!" Fire roared behind them, throwing long, violent shadows across the yard. Clara saw Chayton's back, broad, scarred, unyielding. She saw the madness in Kessler's eyes, the hunger for power that had already destroyed too many lives. She had one bullet left. She could try to take him. But instead, her gaze lifted, just above Kessler's head. Hanging from the wooden arch of the corral entrance, a heavy kerosene lantern swung wildly in the heat drafts. Clara didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She trusted her father's lessons. She trusted the rifle. She raised the barrel a fraction, drew a breath, let it out. The shot snapped the chain clean through. The lantern fell. It crashed down onto the rump of Kessler's stallion, which was still wheeling nearby. The horse, already half mad with fear, exploded into chaos. It bucked blind and violent, a powerful kick slamming square into Kessler's shoulder. He flew backward, hit the dirt hard, his revolver spinning uselessly into the dark. He lay there groaning, clutching his shattered arm. The fight burned out of him. Silence rushed back in, louder than the gunfire. The hired men saw it then, their leader broken. The station defended by a painted demon and a woman who never missed. One by one, the Dust Ridge men turned and fled into the night. Clara let the rifle slip from her hands. Her legs gave out. She sank into the dirt. Chayton turned from Kessler's writhing form and walked to her, ignoring the blood on his face, ignoring the flames slowly chewing through the porch boards. He knelt in front of her, said nothing, and laid his hand over her shaking one. "You missed," he rasped. Wonder threaded through his voice. Clara let out a broken laugh that sounded like a sob. "I never miss." The sun rose the next morning without judgment. It painted the desert in soft pinks and golds, indifferent and beautiful. The Montrose station was scorched, the front porch reduced to a blackened skeleton, the smell of wet ash heavy in the air. But the house still stood. The walls had held. Luke Navarro arrived an hour after dawn, leading a grim-faced Canyon Creek posse. Riding beside him was Eliza Carver. Her face was set like stone. They hadn't come for Clara Whitmore. The irons were meant for Wade Kessler. Eliza Carver had delivered the papers. Chayton had taken the maps, the geological surveys, the affidavits, the proof of murder, to the district judge days earlier. They had ridden through the night to reach the station before dawn. They found Kessler tied to the corral post, broken and simmering. When Luke Navarro hauled him to his feet and read him his rights, Kessler spat into the dust. "It's just land," he muttered. "Just dirt." "No, mister." "Kessler," Navarro said, tipping his hat toward Clara. "It's a home." As the Canyon Creek posse turned back toward town, the dust settled, and the station grew quiet again. Not peaceful, just different. A taut, waiting hush. Chayton led a horse from the barn. It wasn't one of the Montrose stock. It was a Mustang, caught, gentled, and broken during the weeks he'd lived in shadow. A small pack was lashed to the saddle. Clara stood by the well and watched him. Her chest felt heavy with a pain unlike last night's fear. He brought the horse to her. The war paint was gone from his face. He looked human again, young, worn thin, and free. He stopped, took in the station, the horizon, then her. "The enemy is gone," he said. "The house stands." Clara nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, it stands." "The debt is paid," Chayton said. "Final. A ledger closed. Life for life." He gathered the reins, ready to mount. He was leaving. Of course he was. He belonged to open ground and long sight lines. She belonged to walls and fences. Their worlds had met in a storm, and storms pass. Clara looked at his hand resting on the saddle horn. She thought of him standing between her and the gun, of the roof he'd fixed so she wouldn't sleep damp and cold. "Chayton," she said. He froze. She stepped forward and did something no woman in San Judas would dare. She reached out and took his hand. Rough, calloused, warm. He stared at their joined hands, then lifted his eyes to hers, startled. "The debt is paid," she whispered, fierce and unsteady. "I release you from it." She moved closer, into his space, forcing him to see her not as duty, not as balance, but as a woman. "So if you ride away..." "You ride away free," Clara Whitmore said. "But if you stay..." Chaitin's breath caught. "If I stay?" "Then stay for a new reason," Clara said, tightening her grip on his hand. "Not for debt, not for honor, for choice." The wind sighed through the junipers. A hawk circled high in the blue. Chaitin looked to the horizon, the open freedom he had always known, then to the burned porch and the hard work waiting ahead. A dangerous, uncertain future lived between two worlds. Finally, he looked at Clara. Slowly, deliberately. He released the saddle horn and turned his hand, threading his fingers through hers. The grip said everything. "I choose," he said softly. "I choose this." They stood together for a long while, side by side, watching the sun climb above the repaired roof of the station. The road ahead would be harsh. The town would whisper. The world would test them. But as they cast a single, long shadow across the Arizona dust, they understood one truth. They were no longer merely survivors. They were partners. And in the Wild West, that was the most dangerous and powerful thing two people could be. They stood at the beginning of a life they had chosen. What was meant to break them, the storms, the enemies, the fire, had forged them into something stronger, something unbreakable. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso Legal. Disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.